Wriothesley is out, and I'm here to provide you with the details on his numbers and teams, how good I think he is, and where he fits into the meta. Wriothesley is an on-field cryo DPS. He uses his skill to gain a large multiplier onto his normal attacks. However, he will also lose 4.5% of his max HP every normal attack. If his HP reaches 50% or lower, he will lose the buff from his skill. His attacks will no longer produce particles, so it is very important to keep him healed. Wriothesley's burst deals a good amount of AoE cryo damage, split between 5 different hits. It costs 60 energy, so as solo cryo, he will often need up to 140% energy recharge to use it every rotation. At C0, this isn't worth building around, it should just be used whenever it's available as needed. Wriothesley's A1 passive enhances his charged attack if his HP falls below 60%. It will give the charged attack 50% more damage bonus, and also cause it to heal Wriothesley by 30% of his max HP. This sounds like it should be very useful for keeping his HP above 50% to maintain the buff from his skill. However, this A1 passive has a 5-second cooldown, so it will not be active frequently enough. Additionally, if using Wriothesley with a good healer like Bennett, his health will seldom ever fall below 60%, so you will often not actually get to ever use this. Wriothesley's A4 passive gives him a 6% attack buff each time his skill drains his HP, up to 5 stacks for a 30% attack buff. This is a pretty nice buff that gets fully stacked very quickly. With his kit summarized, let's take a look at his C0 teams. At C0, I recommend using him in either a Melt or pure hypercarry team. For Melt, the team is Wriothesley, Bennett, Zhongling, and either Nahida or Shenhe. Nahida and Shenhe are nice because they provide good buffs that Wriothesley can get good uptime on, and they don't need to be used during Bennett's burst duration. This is nice because Wriothesley already doesn't get full uptime on Bennett, so it is important to maintain as much of that uptime as we can. This is part of the reason why Kazuha is not a great pick for Melt. If you want to have any uptime on Cryo BB Shred and Kazuha's buff for Wriothesley at all, you need to use Kazuha inside Bennett's burst, which will take buff uptime away from Wriothesley. You can opt to not swell Cryo at all, but then Kazuha is only buffing Zhongling, and she isn't the majority of the team's damage, so that isn't very good. If you do want to bring Kazuha, then I would recommend going with the hypercarry team of Wriothesley, Shenhe, Bennett, Kazuha. This team is slightly behind the Melt teams, but it does have Kazuha for grouping, so it will likely be better in practice for AoE. So overall, it is the C0 team I recommend the most. One thing you want to keep in mind if you play Wriothesley in a Melt team is that with how his normal attacks line up, he will end up melting his lowest multipliers instead of the higher ones like his N3 and N5. This can be easily fixed, however, by performing an N1 before entering his skill. This will cause the N1 to melt before he enters his skill, which will then cause his attack chain to line up to his N3 and N5 melt, which is what we want. These are the teams that I'm showing the math for with Wriothesley. I did look into some other stuff like Freeze, but it really wasn't good at all, so I didn't bother showing the math for it. Looking at the math for these teams, it is unfortunately looking pretty bad though. His highest DPS team at C0 is only at 56k DPS. For reference to how low this is the second lowest DPS I've calculated for any 5-star DPS under the standards that I calculate at. Having this low DPS while being a melee unit playing Circle Impact inside Bennett's burst is pretty bad. Wriothesley's damage is fully sustained. He doesn't have a good source of either front-loaded or back-loaded damage to make this performance better than what the sheets reflect. While things look pretty bad right now, we also need to take a look at his numbers at C1. C1 allows Wriothesley to get his enhanced charged attack after every N5, regardless of his current HP, and it also makes the charged attack much stronger than it is at C0. At C1, his strongest team actually becomes Mono Cryo, which is Wriothesley, Shenhe, Kazuha, Layla. Mono Cryo isn't advisable at C0 since the team has no healer, but that isn't an issue at C1. In this team, Shenhe becomes more valuable since there are 2 cryo units for her to buff. Layla makes both a great shielder and sub DPS. She can wield the Harbinger of Dawn for massive crit value. She gets a good amount of damage bonus from her C6, allowing her to make excellent use out of Shenhe's stacks. The team also has a long enough rotation for Layla to use both her skill and burst twice per rotation for much more damage and shielding uptime. This team is not only Wriothesley's highest DPS team at C1, but it should also be his most practical since it has no circle impact issues, and also has Kazuha for grouping. The main issue with Mono Cryo is that it has a very long and precise rotation with a lot of swaps. Messing up any of the swaps at all can ruin the rotation by having your cooldowns not aligned, so keep that in mind before deciding to play this team. Melt at C1 is a lot stronger than it was at C0. Wriothesley's charged attack has no ICD, so it will melt every time while having the massive damage bonus provided by the C1. It does, however, still have all the same practical issues as before, but you may find Melt preferable over Mono Cryo if you find Mono Cryo's rotation too difficult to execute. So overall at C1 he becomes much more competent, although the numbers are still a bit underwhelming for the level of investment. And since his C1 has been mentioned a lot already, let's go over his constellations now. C1, as mentioned, causes Wriothesley to gain his enhanced charged attack after every N5. It increases the damage bonus on it from 50% to 200%. With this constellation, you will always want to perform N5C as his combo. This is about a 12% increase in damage, but can go all the way up to 25% in Melt since his charged attack has no ICD. This is absolutely massive for a C1. C1 also extends Wriothesley's skill duration by 4 seconds, but this won't really be useful until C2. C2 gives his burst 40% damage bonus for every stack of his A4, thus going up to 200% when fully stacked. This may seem very similar to Wanderer's C2, but Wriothesley's is different in that he can use his burst during his skill and it won't end his skill duration, meaning that he doesn't have to backload it. At C2, his burst is always worth using every rotation, so his combo changes from 3 N5C to N5C, Q, N5C, N3. The extra skill duration from C1 allows this combo to be performed without his skill expiring. The high damage Wriothesley's burst does at C2 and being able to front load it also fixes his issue of being a purely sustained damage dealer. C3 increases his normal attack talent level by 3. Since this is where the highest portion of his damage comes from, it's another good increase. C4 increases his charged attack healing to 50% and gives him a 20% attack speed buff if his healing overflows. The attack speed isn't very useful since it won't be active until you've already performed a full combo. Wriothesley also has hit lag, so it doesn't get the full benefit from attack speed. C5 increases his burst by 3 levels. This is a decent increase in damage since his burst is dealing a lot of damage now that we have the C2 buff, but it is still smaller than that of his early constellations. C6 is Wriothesley's most powerful constellation, giving him 10% crit rate and 80% crit damage on his charged attacks, which pairs very nicely with the 200% damage bonus from C1. But not only that, it also gives his charged attack a coordinated attack that has the same scaling as the charged attack. The coordinated attack is considered charged attack damage, so it gets both the C1 damage bonus and the crit from C6, and this coordinated attack also has no ICD just like his charged attack, so it allows for incredible damage with Melt. The numbers I have for C6 have it as a 20% increase over C5, but in Melt it would be about 33% increase instead. Overall, he has very strong constellations. C1, C2, and C3 are all good stopping points if you're looking to vertically invest into him, although C2 is where I advise if you want to invest vertically into him, since this is where he starts to truly feel strong. Next, let's look at his weapons. Cash Flow Supervision is his best weapon, about 14% stronger than the next best 5-star weapon, and 29 to 31% better than his best 4-star weapons. The only other weapons worth using on Wriothesley are Tula Telea's Remembrance, Woodsith, and Flowing Purity. Lastly, for his artifacts, there's honestly nothing worth using on Wriothesley other than the Meira Shusei Hunter set. For his main stats, Wriothesley wants an attack percent Sands, Cryo Goblet, and Crit Circlet. And as for my final verdict on Wriothesley, here are the numbers for how I would rate him for my tier list. At C0, his team DPS is very underwhelming. It is honestly just straight up bad if he doesn't have his signature weapon, since he loses so much damage without it. The low DPS is made so much worse by him being a melee unit, playing in Circle Impact with fully sustained damage, no good source of front load or even backloaded damage. He does get better with Constellations, and in my opinion, he will need to be at least C2 before he feels like a legitimately strong DPS. However, even at C2R1, he's likely going to feel weaker than that of other DPS units at that same investment level. And before that, he's honestly just pretty bad. Overall, for my tier list, he ends up in B tier. As for whether or not you should pull for Wriothesley, honestly, I don't think you should. Ganyu is better for Melt, and Ayaka is infinitely better for Freeze. I think that the only people that should pull for Wriothesley are people that really like his character and gameplay. If that is you, then don't let my opinions on his place in the meta deter you from pulling for him. But if you do pull for him, do keep all of his downsides in mind. You should still be able to clear the Abyss just fine with him if that's your goal, but you may find that it's not quite as easy with him compared to stronger DPS units, and you may need to pull for some vertical investment into him for him to reach those goals. But with that said, if you liked today's video, please be sure to give a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please also feel free to join my Discord where you can view my math and communicate with me directly. Thanks, bye.